Hello, Star Trek fans, and welcome to the Rebinge Deep Space Nine podcast. My name is Kim.
And my name is James.
And we're watching Star Trek Deep Space Nine from the beginning, one episode at a time. Welcome back to the podcast. Today we are on Season 6, Episode 18, Inquisition. This episode aired April 8th, 1998. Before we talk about this one, anything to say about last week's, which was Wrongs Darker Than Death and Night or some horrible dark topic? What was the title of that episode? It was very grim.
The actual name was Wrongs Darker Than Death or Night. And I can't believe I just didn't actually there.
Actually.
You were on the right track.
Yeah, I think I had it.
It really was kind of a dark, grim episode. Even if Terek Nor, as it was at the time, was actually quite nice and light and bright and seemed very clean. It wasn't smoggy or dirty. It seemed like a nice place.
Yeah, it seemed like a nice place if you were a Cardassian and not a woman. Like the 50s.
Ooh. Yeah, it follows a theme.
Yeah.
Should we talk about this week's episode, which is Inquisition? Not the Spanish Inquisition, which honestly nobody expects.
Yes, we definitely should. Did you notice this was directed by Michael Dorn?
Oh, I didn't.
Yeah.
Huh.
And also, I knew of the existence of this episode because we're introduced to Section 31, which is something that, having watched The Next Generation mostly at the point that the show aired, I never heard of, didn't know anything about, obviously. So this was something that I knew was coming. So I guess I expected it, but I have never seen the episode. So everything else was a surprise.
Excellent.
So off you go.
We open on the infirmary with Bashir hustling and working late, trying to finish up before he heads out to a medical conference where he's presenting a paper. Odo, who's also in medical, picks on him asking, "Where is the conference? Riser, Casperia Prime?" And Bashir confirms, yes, it's on Casperia.
What resort is it in, is basically what he was asking.
So we see, even in the future, nothing has changed about where doctors like to hold their medical conventions.
I thought Odo was a little snippy in this scene, and it wasn't really explained.
Really? I thought he was just sort of being that, poking his nose in, asking questions, being that sort of inquisitive Odo that he is.
It just felt a little judgy, which is Odo, I guess.
Well, it's fairly valid as well. I mean, you can't hold a convention somewhere like, Deep Space 80.
Or Empok Nor. That was the name of the sideways version of the station, right?
It would be a nice quiet place to hold one, and providing there's no psychotic Cardassians hanging out.
No, but think of what they could do there. They could be looking into that serum that made the super soldiers. There'd be actual medical things to do there.
Oh, that's true.
I always think about those professors from Marshall University who speak at Comic-Con. I mean, they clearly want to come to Comic-Con and they have found a reason to do it. And I think that's the same with the doctors. They want to go to a nice resort and they found a reason to do it and to get their companies to pay for it.
Yeah, it's a good idea if you can do it. And their panels are always full.
Oh, I love them. Never miss them.
Well, now Miles comes into the infirmary and he's holding his arm as he's just dislocated his shoulder. Apparently he was kayaking again, despite medical advice. And Julian has to fix his shoulder again. Julian seems a little crabby about having to repair it again after warning Miles to be careful with his shoulder.
Is that how you remember them putting my shoulder back into place in the emergency room?
No, nothing like that. They basically just lift it up very gently and it pops back in place. There's none of this movie thing of them slamming it into a wall.
What I remember about it, now I was medicated at that point.
Oh, you were high as a kite.
Yeah, because that hurts. If you haven't had that happen to you, that's painful. But what I remember very vividly about the moment that they snapped my shoulder back into place was the world seemed off its axis until that happened. And as soon as it sort of popped back into the place that it was supposed to be, even though the shock was still there and the pain was still there, it's like the world went back to spinning normally. Miles is wearing a really cute little kayaking jacket that I don't think we've seen before in that scene. It seems new.
Yeah, he's got his kayaking pants on as well.
Yeah, this is good.
I think we might have seen those before.
The pants maybe, but I don't think the jacket.
Yeah.
The jacket looked new, and I liked it.
After a quick outside shot of the station, which is looking awesome, we go to Julian's quarters and the computer is waking him up, saying it's 700 hours. He's very groggy and complains he'll need a lot of ractogenos today.
Yeah.
Again, what is the stimulant in Klingon coffee, and why does it also work on humans? Is this some Star Trek secret that it's actually full of, like, banned substance that gives humans a high?
Oh, maybe. I think it's just caffeine or caffeine-like. Although I also think, in many cases, it's just the placebo effect of the thing you like to do in the morning.
Oh, that's a good point. Julian is about to leave when he gets an order from Sisko. All senior officers are to come to Ops. In Ops, Sisko is introducing Director Sloan of Internal Affairs, who tells them they believe there is a security breach on DS9 and someone has been passing information to the Dominion.
I mean, duh. The security on this station has been terrible.
Yeah. After 6 seasons, they've only just noticed this?
Yeah, that's what I thought too.
Have they tried talking to Quark with all those data rods where you can access anything on the station, remember?
Oh, yeah, when you had that drawer full of the spark plugs, as we called it in season 1. Yeah.
Yep. How many subspace shunts are on this station?
Yeah, are we looking into Quark? Why are we assuming it's one of the people in the main crew?
Jadzia protests there must be some kind of mistake, but Sloan tells them they must follow containment procedures, and Sisko confirms they've all been relieved of duty and confined to quarters.
How many times does Julian yawn in these opening scenes? Like, okay, I get it, okay? Really, you only have to do it once.
Sloan will be conducting interviews with them individually and tells Julian he's cancelled his medical holiday.
I read somewhere that Julian was actually giving Sloan the finger as he was leaving the scene. And obviously you and I had watched the episode 2 times and hadn't noticed that. So I went back and looked, and it does kind of look like that's what he's doing. He's dragging his middle finger like along the console as he's leaving. Once you see it, you can't unsee it.
It really does. I think it was a very subtle dig.
It was pretty funny.
And into the opening credits. Julian seems to be kind of pacing in his quarters, and he discovers the replicator isn't working.
Why isn't he napping? After he yawned 75 times in the last scene, you'd think he'd be napping.
That's a good point.
Yeah, that's what you would do.
If you've got nothing to do and you're tired, have a nap. Yeah.
You'd have been passed out quickly.
Oh, completely. Well, he drops his pen under the couch, and as he's trying to retrieve it, an armed Starfleet security officer comes in and informs him Director Sloan wishes to ask some questions.
Although he's trying to retrieve that pen in a way that nobody would ever try to retrieve a pen. He's like holding his hand onto the couch instead of like poking underneath it and feeling for the pen on the floor. It was weird.
As he's been escorted down the corridor, there's a sudden shout of "Stand clear," and 3 armed Starfleet officers carrying phaser rifles rush past them. Julian asks, "What's going on?" And the escort tells him, "Nothing you need to worry about, sir."
Yeah.
She's a little frosty, I think is the only way of describing it.
I think you'd have to be frosty in that particular job.
Yeah.
But also they never do explain that, so I guess they're trying to establish atmosphere for Julian.
Oh, very much so. In the wardroom, formerly known as Mars's party room, a very relaxed and friendly Sloan starts chatting with Julian. He brings up how last time he went on a medical conference, he was kidnapped by the Dominion.
Be aware of people questioning you who are overly friendly.
Yes.
That's how they get you.
Yeah. I really liked Sloane's outfit here.
Oh, yeah.
That red shirt with the vest on top. Really good. It was a great look. Clearly casual day.
I think he's, again, trying to establish a rapport.
Yeah.
Like everything's fine.
Well, they discuss the events of statistical probabilities, and Sloan does some buttering up of Bashir's ego. Then he thanks Julian for his cooperation. Julian points out he still hasn't had breakfast, and Sloan says he'll have something arranged.
Yeah, and then he really creepily takes his order. Like he's a short order cook or something.
There's an interesting moment here. Julian tells Sloan he expected to be interrogated under a very bright light. And Sloan sort of chuckles and smiles and says, "Not this time."
Yeah, that was funny.
Did that make you think of Garak? I thought that was totally a Garak style of response.
Yeah, I can see that.
He's saying something out in the open that he really means and making it sort of a joke. Oh, yes, thumb screws would be day 3. Ha ha ha. He's not joking about that.
Yeah.
Back to Julian's quarters, and he's finally getting breakfast delivered. Julian says he's famished, only to open the tray and discover he's been given gach. And I'm going to have to point out here, that looked like really good gach. If you notice, it was fresh
alive.
And it was clearly wiggling. And plus, if you're hungry, I'm pretty sure you're going to eat the gach. Don't you think there'll be Klingons watching that going, "Oh man, awesome breakfast"?
Yeah, I think we've seen Julian eat Klingon food before.
Yes, we have.
But he might be like me in that there's just only so many things you can actually tolerate for breakfast.
Oh, yeah, because there's a Klingon restaurant in the food court.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. I'm still not sure, even after watching this episode twice, why this happened.
Oh, it was all part of the plan.
The plan is weird. Maybe that's my problem.
Okay, yeah.
Overall, the plan is weird.
Okay, that's a good reason.
Mm.
Julian notices that his data pad in his bag is now the wrong way up.
Mm-hmm.
Also, his teddy bear is lying on its side. And then he does something I still don't understand, why he then gets his pen from under the couch. What was the point of the pen? Was it just so he was like looking straight line at the teddy bear? I didn't get the pen thing.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I guess it could have been so that he was looking in the direction of the bear, but he could have looked at the bear anytime.
Right.
Maybe it was just to establish that when he came back, he remembered that the pad was actually in a different place and that he still had to pick up his pen. And so maybe those things were just connected.
Oh, okay.
But awkward, I would say, at best.
Yeah, exactly.
Mm-hmm.
Well, a console buzzes and he gets a call from Miles, who tells him that Sloan grilled him for 2 hours all about Julian, and he warns him to watch his back. Miles is then cut off and the door chimes, and now we see 2 armed Starfleet security officers telling him that Sloan wants to see him again. Back into the wardroom, and Sloan is now in full uniform. Clearly casual day is over, and he now starts asking Julian questions for clarification. We get more details about how long Julian was in the POW camp with Martog and how he was put into solitary confinement when he complained. Sloan asks Julian if, during those 7 days in confinement, if he met with any Vorta or Founders. Julian corrects him, saying that it was only 5 days. And Sloan informs him Martog said it was 7. Julian insists it was only 5. Sloan's questioning is a lot more intense and much more probing. He questions how they built the transmitter, why the Dominion left the runabout in orbit, and he tells Julian the Dominion wanted him to escape so he could start working for them. It's good to see that Sloan actually listened to our episode.
Yeah, we question that. Mm-hmm. Yeah, he's a lot more intense here and accusatory in many, many ways.
Yes.
And Julian isn't helping himself by being sort of sarcastic, like when he says, oh, when I was in solitary, was I alone?
Yeah.
Just answer the question.
Well, I think Julian isn't really getting a grip on the gravity of the situation.
No. And also, he didn't get much sleep, so I suppose he's snippy.
Yeah.
Yeah, you and I are snippy when we don't get enough sleep.
No, I'm not. I wish I could say that was untrue. Julian protests, saying he is not a spy, and Sloan asks, how can you be sure you're not? He goes on to explain the concept of engrammatic disassociation, a theory that a person's mind can be conditioned to compartmentalize contradictory information, believing one thing and actually doing another. He accuses Julian of being broken and turned into a Dominion spy, saying it's perfect. You can't get caught because you don't know you're even working for them.
A likely story.
Sloan then really switches mood, is the only way to describe it, and says he wants to help him, but he needs his cooperation to tear down those walls and get any memory of his mission, his contact. I thought that was a nice trick with him. You saw Sloan like turn on a dime.
I feel like everything Sloan does is on purpose.
Yeah.
So I imagine him turning on a dime was part of the plan to see if he would get a different reaction.
Like it's very carefully choreographed.
Exactly.
Julian has had enough of all this, telling him he's a loyal Starfleet officer and will not answer any more questions without being formally charged. Sloan replies, you want to do this the hard way? Then I'm going to get the truth out of you. And Julian is paraded along the promenade in handcuffs with 4 security officers guarding him. Sisko stops them and protests. The officers tell him, we have our orders, please stand aside. And they continue down the promenade. In security, Odo has been relieved, and Starfleet security officers put Julian into a cell.
And one of them says something about his Jem'Hadar friends.
Yes.
Which I think is funny because I'm pretty sure no one has Jem'Hadar friends, including Jem'Hadar.
No. After the ad break, Sisko comes into security to talk to Bashir, telling him that Sloan had a son who was killed in a supply run and believes that it was from information supplied to the Dominion. Sloan interrupts, trying to stop Sisko from seeing Bashir, but Sisko puts his foot down, telling Sloan while he's in charge, he'll talk to Bashir anytime he wants, and he'll sit in on any more interviews with Sloan. Sloan seems to acquiesce to the chain of command and reluctantly agrees. We now cut to an interview with Sloan and Sisko, and they both seem pretty tired. Sloan has obviously been going on at this for a long time. He brings up the events of Hippocratic Oath. I think he should just give the episode number because I had to go and look up which one he was talking about. Accusing Julian of helping the enemy. Although, strictly speaking, the Jem'Hadar weren't actually enemies at the time of that episode.
Well, we weren't at war.
Yeah.
But they were still known as being pretty dangerous.
Unfriendly.
But
isn't that a bit of a leap, calling them actual enemies?
I guess it is.
Yeah.
But, yeah, I don't know. Is it sloppy writing here, or was he doing it for a reason?
Oh, I think he's deliberate. I think that the character Sloan would call them enemies, even if they weren't formally enemies.
Okay.
I think he's blurring the lines. He now goes on to statistical probabilities and saying how they made the suggestion the Federation should surrender. At this point, Sisko steps in to defend Bashir and says this great line. Bashir has made some questionable decisions. Yes, he has.
Yes, he has.
It's one of his overarching traits.
Yeah.
Sisko also gets annoyed at Sloan's line of questioning and his use of a circular argument.
Right.
Now Sloan brings up how Julian hid his genetically engineered background and lied to get his medical license and to join Starfleet.
You know when TV shows will do sort of summaries of things that have happened before and they pretend like that's a new episode?
Oh, yeah.
That's what this reminded me of. It's like he's working his way through a bunch of previous episodes with Julian.
It does feel like that, yes.
They should have just done flashbacks, showed little scenes from all those episodes.
Right. The other thing here is I think this was the point I noticed that Sloan is quite skillfully using language. And he uses phrases like made contact with and then said when you were with the Dominion instead of saying, when you were a prisoner of war or, when you were taken prisoner by the Dominion or captured by the Dominion.
Yeah, he's sneaky.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
I feel he's sort of trying to trick Julian into saying the things he wants. Julian is now back in the cell, and Sisko suggests, isn't it possible that he was recruited by the Dominion and it was blocked from his memory? Julian says this is impossible, and Sisko says he should get some rest and leaves. And then we cut to a sleeping Julian being awoken by Sloan, who tells him he's now being transferred to Starbase 51 for further interrogation. Under Starfleet Special Order 66715, he's been given authority to neutralize security threats to Deep Space Nine by whatever means necessary.
That's always dangerous.
Yeah, that's a little bit of a broad remit. That ends up in a lot of trouble.
Yeah.
Sloan tells Julian he'll spend the rest of the war in a maximum security cell, unless he signs a confession. A little bit of Cardassian-inspired operational theory there.
You're guilty. Just sign here.
As they're about to take Julian away, he's suddenly beamed out, reappearing on board a Dominion ship. The camera pans to Weyoun, who says, "Good evening, Doctor. Welcome home."
Ugh.
And we go into the ad break with a very confused-looking Bashir.
Do you remember when you first saw this, did you think, wait a minute, maybe he is a spy?
I didn't quite know what to think.
Because that's what they want you to think.
Oh, yes.
For a minute, yeah. I always think it because I don't necessarily believe the best in Julian.
Oh, you might be a little biased there.
Yeah.
Were you watching this thinking, oh, is this where Julian leaves the show?
But really, that would be in his favor if all of a sudden you found out, oh no, for the entire time he had been replaced by a founder or something.
Well, as I said before, they should keep on testing Julian regularly to make sure he's not a founder because they seem to like changing into Julian.
Exactly.
Given a chance, who do you want to turn into? Julian, please.
He's always wandering around the station, gossiping, going on dates. I mean...
doesn't really seem to have a job.
Yeah, it doesn't really seem to work much. It's fun.
Weyoun tells Julian they got him out just in time. Starfleet has discovered he was working for them. Julian protests, saying he's not a spy. And Weyoun replies, "You actually believe that? That's what makes you such a good operative." We then go into some exposition from Weyoun about how these conversations always follow the same pattern and the walls in Julian's mind will eventually break down and he'll accept the truth. Also about how in the prison camp, Julian accepted there was no way Starfleet could beat the Dominion, and to save billions of lives, he agreed to provide information to end the war quickly. Weyoun calls it the moral decision. Julian looks completely rocked by all of this, and Weyoun finally tells him, "Your friends on Deep Space Nine may vilify you, but history will judge you to be a great man, visionary, I think that was the script he was supposed to use for Dukat. You know that would work on a Cardassian.
For sure.
Weyoun continues to push, and an angry Julian replies, I don't remember because it never happened. Weyoun just sighs, saying, I see this is going to be one of our more difficult sessions. I love Weyoun here. The way he sighs and the way he talks.
Yeah.
This is peak Weyoun.
Agreed.
Well, Julian suddenly asks, why would you and Sloan both be trying to convince me of the same lie, unless you were working together? Sloan is the traitor. This was the point where, in the episode, I went, oh, this is what's happening. Sloan's trying to cover his tracks and implicate Julian as a traitor.
Yeah.
I remember watching this episode, and that's literally the point. I went, oh, I got the episode figured out. I know what's going on.
I think it's a mistake, though, to try to do that with someone like Julian.
Yeah.
Because you know that he's smarter than the average person because of his augmentation. So why would you pick him? I guess they picked him because of his proximity to it having been him, but also they could have done it with Martog or Worf, too, because they were also in that camp, or Garrick.
Well, I think part of that might come down to the feelings about augments. So you could point at an augment and say, oh, yeah, they're a traitor because they're an augment.
That's a good point.
So there's sort of a built-in bias against them.
That's a good point. And that whole thing that happened in statistical probabilities as well.
Yeah.
See? They would do it.
Right.
Okay.
Well, before anything else can happen, there's an announcement that an enemy ship is approaching, and they're hit by fire. Kira and Worf beam across and rescue Bashir. Back on the Defiant, Sisko asks Julian, I suppose you have a reasonable explanation of why the Dominion broke you out of that cell. He tells Sisko that both Sloan and Weyoun are working together, trying to frame him. He does make a very reasonable suggestion here that perhaps Sloan is a changeling.
Yeah.
It's not unheard of.
It is reasonable. What's totally unreasonable at this point is that the Defiant could have found this ship, beamed through the defenses of the Jem'Hadar ship to get Julian and taken him back to the Defiant.
It's Star Trek.
That's the least believable part of the whole story.
It's Star Trek. The impossible is possible.
Except it's not, because it's not what happened.
Sisko is completely dismissive of Bashir, saying he's had enough of his lies and to get him off his bridge. Julian appeals to the others, Jadzia and Miles, but they're very unsympathetic.
Yeah.
He grabs Miles by the shoulder, who just shrugs his hand off. And then Julian is surprised by his reaction, asking, your shoulder? Is it all right? He thinks for a moment and says, you dislocated it when we were playing spring ball. An irritated Miles responds, so, it's better now.
I'm over it.
And then Julian twigs it.
Yeah.
He says, you're not Miles, and he's not Sisko. This isn't real. As he says that, the bridge dissolves, and we see he's in a holosuite. Behind Bashir at a panel, we see Sloan, who says, you're right, Doctor. None of it's real. But I am, and this isn't over. Sloan clearly has access to the mirror universe, as he's using exactly the same tailor as Clubbing Kira, aka the Intendant.
Yeah.
He's wearing this black leather outfit with like a button-up front piece. It's so something that Kira would wear. It's definitely the same tailor.
I love it when the bad guys wear leather. It cracks me up. Such a cliche.
Well, look to the right of him, there are these two bruisers. These two really big guys, both wearing the same, like, leather outfits.
Yeah.
It's very interesting. Sloan congratulates Julian, saying, it's not often we're wrong, and there's only one more test. They put an implant behind his ear with a neurosynaptic relay. They've been recording his neuroelectrical responses to the events that have been happening. They subjected Julian to high levels of stress to ensure accurate test results. Hence the lack of sleep, the no food, no one listening to Bashir, his friends turning on him.
Vorta giving him scones, the moving of his teddy bear.
Is that part of it? Okay.
It seemed to be.
Yeah.
So much stress.
It all sort of makes sense when you look at it like that.
Yeah.
They remove the device and Sloan scans it, telling Julian his loyalty to the Federation is beyond reproach, but he would have preferred to keep Julian under observation a little longer. They didn't know about O'Brien's injury, or they would have added that into the program. Julian asks Sloan who he really is and who he works for. And then we go into a lot of exposition with Sloan telling him how he too works for the Federation and for Starfleet, and their official designation is Section 31. So this is it, the first appearance and first reference to Section 31. Sloan continues telling him that They keep a low profile. Their remit is to search out and identify potential dangers to the Federation, and when they find them, they deal with them quietly. He explains how they're an autonomous department. They don't submit reports, and they don't ask for approvals for operations. And perhaps most surprisingly, they're part of the original Starfleet Charter. Julian is kind of outraged by this whole thing and asks that they've been working for 200 years on their own without specific orders, accountable only to themselves. They act as judge, jury, and executioner. Sloan tells Julian that it takes special people to do what we do, to sublimate your own ambitions to the best interests of the Federation.
And you have to look good in leather.
Someone like Julian. He says Julian is intelligent, resourceful, and fascinated by covert operations. We're on the same team. We believe in the same principles. Julian isn't falling for any of this, telling Sloan he violates those principles. And Sloan replies, in order to protect them. The classic moral quandary. I do bad things, but for good reasons.
I don't know. What has he done that's so bad?
Sloan tells him that they deal with threats to the Federation that jeopardize its very survival. He's not afraid to bend the rules if the situation requires it. They've saved millions of lives, and the ends do justify the means. I think if you're in that kind of role, that's quite literally what you have to tell yourself.
Well, there still has to be somebody in charge and making sure that we're looking at the right things and doing the right things in order to be effective, even if you're not maybe answering up to one of the useless admirals. I mean, are they just little teams that go out and do whatever the heck they want? Then I would agree that's a mess.
There has to be an Enabrantane in charge at the top somewhere.
Right.
With his little cardigan.
Yes, with his grandpa sweater and mimosa.
Right. Julian threatens to expose them, and Sloan responds, I wouldn't lose any sleep over it. And then one of the bruisers hyposprays Julian, and he goes down. That whole scene I thought was really interesting. I really liked the actor who played Sloan. He had this real smoothness, the way he could turn on a dime, the way he's very pleasant, and then he's very forthwith. There's a real great balance he brings to that character who makes him seem like a real spy.
William Sadler is the name of this actor, and I agree. He's absolutely perfect in this role. He really brings across that sort of menacing side, but also, well, obviously I'm right.
Yes.
Clearly.
It's all very measured.
Yes. He was in Bill and Ted, you know. He was deaf.
We go back to the station, and Bashir is debriefing. Kira tells the assembled group that they couldn't find any evidence of a transport. Sisko reports there's no record of a Deputy Director Sloan anywhere in Starfleet. However, Section 31 was a little more complicated. Starfleet Command does not acknowledge its existence, but they don't deny it either.
Well, if it's in the original charter, can nobody read the charter?
It's in the hidden sections of the charter.
I see.
Oh, it could be in very small Ferengi print.
Or redacted.
Yeah, there's some sections that are underlined, and that actually is the text.
I wonder why they're called Section 31.
It's a good number.
Started with 31 people. It was the 31st Amendment to this charter.
Oh, that's a good one. Starts with 31 officers. I like that idea. Kira, being the realist as ever, says, this sounds like a cover-up to me.
Yeah.
And Odo points out, every other great power has a unit like Section 31. He'd be surprised if the Federation didn't have one. Julian asks, so when push comes to shove, we're willing to sacrifice our principles in order to survive. And Sisko replies, I wish I had an answer for you. Kira suggests tracking down Sloan themselves, and Odo tells them, if Section 31 has survived this long, they'll be very good at hiding their tracks. Sisko tells them, we don't have to find them. They'll come to us, and tells Bashir, Sloan tried to recruit you. He doesn't seem like someone who'd take no for an answer.
Yeah.
Next time he asks you to join their little group, you'll say yes. When leaving, Odo says, congratulations, Doctor. It looks like you'll get to play a spy after all. Except this time, it's for real.
I like that. I like that a lot.
And we close on a pensive-looking Bashir, who just gives the barest hint of a smile. The end.
Well, these episodes with no B story, they tend to go pretty quickly.
Oh, they really do.
I noticed people have pointed out that when we give thumbs down, the episodes tend to be shorter, but it's also shorter when there's no B story.
Yeah.
Well, that's the end of the episode. do you have over-analysis?
Yes, the first one is.
Mm-hmm.
At the end, do you think Bashir was giving kind of a little smirk?
Honestly, I didn't notice, but I think he would. If we look all the way back to episode 1, when we first met him, he was here for adventure. And this was the Wild West and whatever, right? And he really wanted to make some big difference. And then you see him with his James Bond holosuite programs, and clearly he's interested in that. Maybe even a little bit from the statistical probabilities episode, where he's still trying to find a way to make a big difference. Yeah. This is an opportunity, though I would be very nervous about getting involved with people you couldn't trust. You can't win.
Yeah. I watched that ending numerous times, and he has just a little facial twitch in there.
Yeah.
And I'm like, oh, he sort of softens it when they close.
Maybe. He might also just be laughing at Odo, because Odo was sort of poking at him earlier. Maybe that's how they talk to each other. But he could be interested.
Right. I took it as, oh, okay, I can do that.
Well, yeah, especially after they sort of tortured him.
Next thing, and this might be a complaint about Julian.
Okay.
He does seem to have this weird over-moralizing side to him. It might be genuine, but from the observer of the show, it looks almost disingenuous, almost like a holier-than-thou. Like in statistical probabilities with the there but for the grace of God. Whereas in the quickening, it seems to be very genuine that he could care for people. And honestly, I can't blame Siddig for this, because I think the writing for Bashir is up and down, just for the whole character. So, it makes me question what they were aiming at, because I think they're trying to aim at Julian being very sincere, but it just doesn't come off like that.
Over the last handful of episodes, I've complained about Julian's behavior sort of being this holier than thou. And I know better than everybody, even when he was suggesting to Worf that they should let 30,000 troops be in danger and continue to look for Sisko. So I do think his ego has grown since it came out that he's an augment. And he just seems way more comfortable in that now. Like, okay, now you know I'm smarter. I already knew I was smarter, but now everybody knows that I'm smarter. And so, he definitely, I think, has been showing this holier-than-thou attitude for a while. There's a little bit of that visible in a lot of Star Trek, where clearly the Federation, their decisions are moral and the high ground and always right.
Yeah.
And I think what they're trying to say here with Section 31, and I could be totally overreading it, is you can't always take the high ground. It's like you think the reason we're being so successful is because we're always taking the high ground and we're always making the righteous choice. But what you don't know is there is a seedy underbelly that's going on. You just didn't know about it. So this is sort of questioning the moral high ground as being the right place. And Julian is the first one, I guess, to respond to it and to hear it. But I agree, he's being annoying. I know best.
Well, this actually leads into directly my next point, which is we know the Dominion intends to genocide humanity, destroy the homeworld.
Right.
So rigidly sticking to your principles would result in your extermination. Does that mean you all die holding the moral ground? When you're fighting an enemy that is absolutely devoid of principles, how can you respond in any other way? Do you get to die feeling morally superior?
We've been doing this podcast now for 140 some episodes.
Yeah.
And we have brought this up a number of times where can you always do what you think is morally the right thing and still come out on top? Or do you sometimes have to get yourself a little dirty to get the best outcome? I mean, we've talked about it in various ways. And I think you and I just in life have had those conversations about it, but it's not always the best answer for you to be crushed and taken advantage of, or, if your enemy is gassing all of your people and you just stand back and say, well, I couldn't do anything like that. Is it the right thing to do to just let them all be gassed? No, it isn't. But do you turn around and then do the exact same thing? These are just common things to debate and to discuss. And I'm happy to see it come up again here because it's just interesting. It makes for an interesting conversation. But we don't have the right answer. I don't know what the right answer is.
Yeah. I would think in this situation, you are in a total war. The enemy isn't giving you the ability to survive.
Yeah.
It's either you win or your side will all die.
Yeah, if you just sit back and try to always do the right moral thing, you're just going to get exterminated.
Yeah. There isn't an option for a peaceful resolution. They will destroy your homeworld. They will kill all your people. You can't take a moral high ground.
The actions of Section 31 come up quite a bit in Star Trek Discovery, and there's a lot of these sorts of discussions in that show as well.
Yeah.
It's very interesting. I think the moral high ground means you and the good people need to survive.
I would agree. Moving on from the really heavy questions, is Sloan an augment?
Wow, I don't know. I'm going to say no, because I don't think this plan was genius.
I disagree.
Oh,
I think
okay.
he is an augment.
It could be.
I think he hints at that, saying about how very special people are needed for this. He is recruiting his own kind, someone like him.
You know, when he was able to sort of turn on the charm and be friendly?
Yes.
That makes me think he's not, because I don't think we've seen where the augmentation makes people super charming.
I am going to leap to Space Seed and say Khan was quite charming in that.
I disagree. As a woman, I thought he was horrible. He's horrible to her and the woman that he manipulates.
Yeah.
And written by a man, so I don't agree.
He was charming to Kirk.
But very briefly.
Well, only until he got a position of strength.
As soon as they start asking him questions, he goes right to, you people are all beneath me. But okay, I take your point. I think it's possible.
Next thing. During a war, do you think you should maybe restrict all non-essential travel? I would suggest a medical party trip to the party planet is the very definition of non-essential.
100% agree. What are you doing? Going off to a resort to have a convention in the middle of the war when you are essentially right in the heart of it.
Right. Next thing. I like how Sloan, played by William Sadler, is really paralleling Garrick. The sort of the dark humor. Like when Julian is criticizing him over Sloan's remit of unaccountability. And he replies with, "You make it sound so ominous." And during the first interrogation, the joke about the bright lights, and not this time. I felt the actor did such a good job of making a Federation version of him. I don't know if he used Garrick as a model, but I thought his portrayal was just awesome.
I agree. This is a great intro to Section 31.
Yeah.
That actor, the way he portrayed it, the way he came in as someone else, and then you realized, who he really was later. I thought that was well done. I thought the acting was very good. I see what you mean about Garrick. Garrick maybe is even darker than this guy. Because I'm not sure. You know how Garrick will do that thing where he continues to pretend like he wasn't in the Obsidian Order, even though everybody knows it? I can't see this guy doing that. So there's maybe a different approach and personality there.
Yeah.
Where Garrick never likes the mask to come down. But obviously here, Sloan used the mask as a weapon.
Gotcha. And I think my final point comes back to something that Sloan said. He talked about Julian getting his medical degree, hiding or lying about being an augment, and then joining Starfleet. So, augments can't be doctors either?
Well, not in Starfleet.
Well, he specifically said medical degree. So, is that a restricted profession?
I mean, maybe it should be, but the only thing we know for sure is they're not allowed in Starfleet. That's really all we know. Everything else, we're just guessing.
I want to know more about this Federation Department of Genetic Purity, led by a descendant of Colonel Green.
I think you'll have to read some books. You're going to have to read some Star Trek novels to get any more info on that. Unless the Section 31 show actually happens and we get more detail there.
Oh, that'd be cool. And my very, very final point.
Oh, final.
So, augments are banned from joining Starfleet unless it's in Section 31's interest. Then it's, hey, come on board.
Well, now that would make sense, right? If they're not being regulated, then they don't have to hold up to the same rules. So it might make sense, but I would argue that's incredibly dangerous to to allow them into a group that is unregulated. Now you're really asking for trouble.
You remember Khan, right?
Yeah. Yeah, that's funny.
That kind of ties back to my view that maybe Sloan himself is actually an augment.
And hiding, maybe.
Oh, good point. And that wraps up my overanalysis.
Well, do we think that Sloan's kid really died?
No.
And that's motivating him? That was made up?
I think it's all made up.
I really felt like there were a lot of things wrong with this plan.
Yeah.
Like when they beam Bashir onto the fake Jem'Hadar ship with Weyoun. I mean, if Bashir really was a spy and he was hiding it, he would have known that this isn't how it worked. It could have been a different Vorta.
That's true.
It probably was. We never saw Weyoun at that prison camp. It was a different guy.
Yeah, and that could have been a code word that they used.
Yeah, so he would have been on to him right away. I mean, I guess if he was really doing the thing, whatever that phrase was that Sloan said, where he was blocking it out and he didn't even really know, even if that was the case, this wasn't going to bring it out. So I just think this plan was so dumb, unless they weren't really trying to unearth him as a spy, and the entire point of this was just to audition him as a member of Section 31.
Oh, okay. I never even considered that one.
I just think faking the interaction with the Vorta was not going to bring it out.
Okay, I took that as I believe that Sloan actually thought the engrammatic disassociation theory was actually true and that Julian could have been programmed. And this is why he went through all this charade, because he thought that's what was happening. Sloan believed it. But if your idea is that Sloan was testing him, putting him under stress, questioning him, doing all these things to try and recruit Julian to see if he had the ability, and then reading the implant to see what his reactions were and how he behaved, that is a really interesting view. And that's completely possible. Everything we've seen in this episode, I think, would point to that is a potential explanation for what he was doing. That the, oh, you might be an agent was a cover for a deeper story. Wow, that is awesome headcanon, Kim.
Thank you.
I really like that.
Then the only other thing that I had in my overanalysis is that, like the mirror universe, my real impression of Section 31 comes from Discovery. And there's a lot of mirror universe in Discovery, and there's a lot of Section 31 in Discovery. And so I always found the mirror episodes on Deep Space Nine, like you said, it's enhanced by what we know about Discovery.
Yeah.
But because I saw Discovery first, I actually sort of find them as like low rent versions because they're not
so mean.
They're not as big and they're not as dramatic. They're small stories, like every other story really is on this show. So it fits with this show, but I think Discovery was just so much bigger with it. This is, I think, here as we introduce Section 31, I think it's enhanced by what I know about Section 31 because this seemed like a really good addition where there was so much subterfuge and when the guys turned up in leather and they completely believe in what they're doing and they're like, hey, just come and join us. Oh, you want to look into us? Yeah, go right ahead. It's really not a secret.
Yeah.
So I thought this was a very good intro to a thing that I know a lot about that happens later in terms of the shows that air.
That's really cool.
Yep. I still think the plan was bad depending upon what he was trying to accomplish. But this seemed on point.
Okay, question here.
Yeah.
At what point did you figure out what the episode was? They totally led me down a path of Sloan working with Weyoun. I was hooked by that.
I never really thought it was that, but I guess because I knew this was the Section 31 introduction, so I knew before it happened that that's who they were, which again is the reason why spoilers are terrible and you don't really want them.
Gotcha.
But the show is very old and
it's kind of hard
it's all
to do that.
Happened and it's in canon and I guess I knew too much about it going in.
Oh, gotcha.
I certainly had a moment of doubt about Bashir when he beamed onto the Jem'Hadar ship with Weyoun. I was like, oh, wait. But what I didn't think it was a spy. What I thought was, oh, geez, he's a founder again. He's a changeling. So I did have a moment of doubt there that maybe he really was a spy or not who he seemed to be.
Yeah. You know, that could have been a really interesting storyline if the founders were able to program another one of the founders to actually believe they were someone, to mask all their memories, to make a perfect copy. You could have done a great episode with this person protesting about, look, I'm really Julian. I really am the person.
Yeah.
And Wayoon bringing in the founder who like starts merging with them, and they're like, oh, okay.
Although, we already did that with O'Brien in an episode.
Oh, that's true.
So it would have been a retread of something we already did.
Okay, that's true. Yeah.
But as soon as Worf and Kira beamed onto the Jem'Hadar ship, I went, this is all a hologram. Because there's just no way. There's just no way. We have not shown that we can do that.
Yeah.
And here we just did it without thinking. And then
we're done.
Everybody was acting funny when he beamed over to the Defiant. Of course, by then we're at the end. So it's not. Anyway, yeah, I figured it out from then. Well, I don't have anything in Women in the Future. Not because there are no women in this episode, but because there's just women doing their jobs. Nobody was sexually harassed. It was fine. So I will go to rating. Thumbs up, thumbs down, or neutral. What is your rating?
Absolute thumbs up. I loved this episode when I originally watched it. I've enjoyed it in every subsequent rewatching. Sloan is a great character, really well portrayed. I think it's an episode that actually gives Siddig some feet to actually do some acting in. And I think the character came off really quite well in this. Also, the introduction to Section 31 really helps build the Star Trek world, the Star Trek universe. Great episode, thoroughly enjoyable, absolute thumbs up.
Yeah, I give it a thumbs up. I enjoyed it. I thought it was a good intro to Section 31. I thought the plan was a little weird and there were some quirky bits in it. But I think at the end, when they sort of explained it all and wrapped it up, I was like, okay, I get you. I get it. That makes a lot of sense.
Agreed.
So, yeah, I give it a thumbs up. It's interesting for us to debate Section 31. And I'm sure a lot of people were upset that they introduced this back when this show first aired because, Gene Roddenberry, blah, 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 blah. The original vision, this wouldn't happen. I'm sure there was a lot of that. And I feel like a lot of that is nonsense because that was the 60s and whatever. But this does definitely bring a different flavor of something into Starfleet.
Right.
And we don't know yet. Like he said, we find a problem, we take care of it. We don't really know yet what that means. You could interpret that in a lot of different ways. It could just mean we catch somebody, we give them a stern talking to, because that's the Starfleet way.
Quietly.
Or it could mean we're killing people or poisoning whole planets or whatever. We don't really know. But even if we just sort of dive all the way down to what they do in this episode, it's pretty evil what they're doing to Bashir. They are depriving him of sleep. They're torturing him. They're depriving him of sleep.
Yeah.
They're depriving him of food, and they're listening in on his private conversations with people.
I believe they're using enhanced interrogation techniques.
They are, except he doesn't even know that he's being interrogated and that these things are being done to him until the very end. But listening in on private conversations that aren't even real conversations, because who he's talking to, those are just holograms, so it's all being listened to or recorded or whatever. I mean, that's a pretty nasty way to treat your own people.
Yeah.
So that definitely has a dark side that people who claim there shouldn't be any darkness in Star Trek are going to complain about. But I don't know. I dug it. I thought it was good.
Yeah, I believe those techniques were just enhanced interrogation. They weren't classed as torture.
You take this guy and you take Michelle Yeoh, you've got yourself something with Section 31.
Oh, wow. It's another spin-off show I would love to see. I would like to see Section 31. I think it could be a really interesting foray into the edges of what Starfleet is allowed to do.
Yeah, definitely. Well, that wraps up Season 6, Episode 18. Come back next week for Episode 19. In the meantime, if you'd like to send us your own over-analysis of this or any episode, or if you just want to say something nice, you can email us at ReBingeIT@gmail.com or tweet us at ReBingeIT. We're also on Instagram and YouTube at ReBingeIT. You can check us out on TalkThroughMedia.com, where you can listen to the other podcasts in our network, and you can also leave feedback for individual episodes there. We are part of a Patreon, patreon.com/StarTrekTTM, which benefits all of the podcasts in the Talk Through Media network.
Thanks for joining us on the ReBinge Deep Space Nine podcast.
That's it for me.
And that's it from me.